So we have 5 presenters, and one of them is not 6, sorry, and one of them is not going to attend. He had something urgent issue. We are going to start with Carlos Augusto. I think he's not here as well. So Marta Pereira, yeah, thank you. Vítor Ramon Fernandes on my left, and Ihsanullah, are you here? It's online attending. If you are
Yes,
here,
yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
All
That's
right.
fine. Professor Nergis, she's also here. Okay. Before starting the panel, I think I need to say something on the why this panel is named as the International System Change and the Middle East Politics. The last, maybe the most important issue that happened in the Middle East regarding the international system change is the meeting between Iran and Saudi Arabia. How is it possible to make them come together and open their consulates in the capitals? And now there is a significant decrease in tension in Yemen, and it can be considered as a regional power politics, but also China's involvement make it international systemic issue. So that's why I named the panel International System Change and Middle East Politics, because still there is some power degree changing the nature of the Middle East, and they mostly dependent on the superpowers or the great powers. So we can see the Russia and the US in Syria. We can see China's involvement now and the Russia's involvement in Syria. And regional powers, they are in power struggle, make their policies implementable in the region. So, and the Turkey's involvement is also changing the dimension of the Middle East politics, if it's the regional power politics. So we have different subjects, and I am sure that all of them has to mention about the great power politics or the power change in the Middle East. It sounds that the title of the papers, they might be too specific for an issue, but you will see that they will be involved about the great power politics. So I would like to give the floor in line with the program. We don't have the Corina and the Carlo Augusto here, so the first presenter is going to be Marta Pereira. Yeah? So I am going to give the floor to her to start her presentation. We have now 4 people, so you can extend your speech to 20 minutes. But please be on time so that we could have a Q&A session much more than the presenter. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And I also thank everyone that is present here to listen to my presentation. This presentation is part of my PhD thesis, and it is called Abraham Accord, the Accords before Abraham, which means that we are going to see how some normalization processes before the Abraham Accords are different from the Abraham Accords themselves. But first, we need to understand something, that is, Israel rarely at peace with Arab and or Muslim countries. On May 14, 1948, Israel was declared independent, and then there were wars waged against it, led by neighboring Arab states and financed by others like Saudi Arabia. However, there were several changes on the regional order. The first was with the establishment of the 1979 Islamic Republic of Iran. The Sunni Arab states started to perceive a Muslim country from another sect with a new identity as a threat, as it also wanted the hegemony on the region. More recently, the region changed once again, but from the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. The Obama administration launched the JCPOA, which allowed Iran to produce more uranium for nuclear purposes, and this was seen as a treacherous act for the Sunni Gulf monarchies and Israel. The Trump administration also changed the Middle East dynamics by recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital and by mediating the Abraham Accords. However, the Abraham Accords aren't a normalization moment isolated from the relations between Israel and Arab states, as I stated. There were two peace treaties celebrated with Israel, the 1979 peace treaty with Egypt and the 1994 peace treaty with Jordan. Therefore, the research question that I propose is, how is the 2020 Abraham Accords an innovation comparing with the peace treaties that were celebrated between Israel and Egypt in 1979 and Jordan in 1994? To answer this question, I will use the theoretical framework proposed by Stephen Walt, which has two theories. The first is the theory of balance of threat that states that states react to an external threat by creating alliances. A threat is characterized by being a superior perceptive power, and after they perceive a threat, they can create two types of alliances. The first is bandwagoning, which is being part of a balance with the threat. And the one is balancing, which consists on allying to the status quo powers. The balancing can be negative if the alliance is only to balance against the threat, or positive if there are development of capabilities. These capabilities, if they are military, it is characterizing the balance as hard, and if there are other capabilities developed, the balancing can be soft. However, to also perceive and characterize not only the threat, but also the states, I am going to use a geopolitical and geostrategic analysis, which will be by Guido Fischers, which considers power to be assessed by three types: political, economic, and psychological. But to answer this research question, I will fulfill three different goals. The first will be to characterize the historical context, because as we know, a treaty or an accord are responses to historical context, and then this context has characteristics that are unique and will influence the appearance of the treaty and its writing. So the peace treaties are understandable, a way to end the war that took place against Israel. I will only talk about two wars that are different from each other. The first one was the 6 Days War, which I believe that it's very important because Israel took control of the Golan Heights, the Gaza Strip, the Sinai Peninsula, the West Bank, and Jerusalem. And then the second conflict is the Yom Kippur War, which Israel managed to make the invaders retreat on a time that was a Jewish holiday. When we apply the theory of balance of threat to this historical context, we understand that the Arab and Muslim states understood Israel to be a revisionist state, as it was Jewish and had occupied the Palestinian territory. Therefore, Israel was seen as a threat. But when we apply the theory of balance and we see that Jordan felt unprotected against Israel and sought Egypt, the status quo power, they formed a negative balance against Israel. However, after 4 wars and realizing that Israel was the winner, it revealed that Israel also had more capabilities developed. As for the Abraham Accords, the context is completely different because there was never a war waged against the Gulf monarchies and Israel. And when we see that the main threat that these Gulf monarchies had for Israel was economic, as they were part of the boycott movement against the Jewish state. In February 2005, the King Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa of Bahrain stated to American ambassador at Manama that there were contacts between Bahrain and Mossad. As for UAE, between 2010 and 2018, it tried to soft power foreign policy, talking about peace among Abrahamic religions to form a new Middle East. So applying once again the theory of the balance of threat, we see that neither Bahrain nor the UAE felt threatened by Israel, as it is a small state, far away geographically. But Iran is what they felt threatened about, as it was geographically near. It is a Shiite theocracy who wishes to export the revolution to the Shia who are oppressed by the Gulf monarchies, and these Gulf monarchies are friends of the USA, the great Satan. Therefore, they both saw Israel as a powerful and innovative state, representing the status quo who can help develop their capabilities to face Iran in every type of power. Therefore, a positive balancing was created. So let's now talk about the geopolitical and geostrategic context of each country. In 1979, Egypt had a strong national wealth with gas, oil, precious metals, and they had fertile soil near the Nile River. But these riches were all invested in defense. And also it created a socialist regime applied to the Arab countries, which caused the Egyptian economy to become stagnant and with no income from foreign investments. As for Jordan, its problems were threefold. It had populational problem as it received Palestinian refugees, and that's a strong populational pressure, and also felt threatened by the radical attacks that the Palestinians were carrying on. Also, with the wars, Jordan lost cultivation land and strategic depth, and also there were economical issues with the loss of land, but also with the oil embargo, which had impact on the Arab countries, which meant less foreign investment from the Arab countries. So when applying the theory of balance of threat to this context, we understand that after losing wars against Israel, the Jordan and Egypt saw Israel as a status quo state. Hence, by creating positive balance, status quo was preserved and both reaped beneficial consequences at the defense and economical levels. As for the geopolitical context of the Abraham Accords, it is completely different. Bahrain is a very important island. UAE, I'm sorry, I was carrying forward. UAE is located in the Middle East Shatr Belt, which means that even though the major ethnicity is Arab, there are diversity of tribes within each emirate, and also the major population is Sunni, but there is a Shia minority. Also, as it is in the juxtaposition of three continents, the parts are deep, which is as commercial trade, the topography is low, which is as land trade routes, and the coastal cities were always very, very populated, and they are defined by multiple races and ethnicities and the importation of foreign workforce. There are a lot of natural wealth, but scarce natural resources. To preserve tribal and historical identities, the different emirates created a federation to promote coexistence. But the fact that there are natural wealth, and scarcity of natural resources can create competition between regional and external powers, creating instability to the political system. Two types of ideologies have tried. There's political Islam through Iran. Dubai and Sharjah have strong Shia minority, and these minorities can revolt against the governors, and the Muslim Brotherhood through Qatar, UAE's neighbor. As for Bahrain, it is, as I said, a very important small island. It is located in the middle of the Persian Gulf, and USA has headquarters there. But Iran also claims this island to be a 14th province. It is located on a rich oil region, but produces a sixth of the crude in the world. Bahrain is also a mostly Shiite country ruled by Sunni minority. As for Israel, there are two weaknesses and two strengths that are important for this paper. The first one is that Israel considers itself as an island country, as it is isolated from in the region. The majority of the population is not Jewish, and also it's increasingly westernized, which means that they don't know what being Jewish means now. And as we can see by the protests, it's something that is now being even more difficult. However, it has a very strong economy with a very strong tech sector, and it has strong dissuasion power, both from the Animud policy and from the conventional weaponry. So we can say that with the Abraham Accords, it is understandable that Israel isn't a threat to the Gulf and vice versa, as they are not geographically close, nor they were ever threatening. On the contrary, all the states understand that together their capabilities can be improved and can be used against a threat. And having applying the theory of balance, this is a net positive and negative balancing. Therefore, it is perceivable by applying the first theory that Iran is a major threat to all the Abraham Accords signatory states, as it is bigger, more populated, geographically close to the monarchies, and with its proxies to Israel, has strong military forces, and is clearly threatening, wanting to export its ideology, annex Bahrain, and eliminate Israel. Finally, as for the impacts, with the peace treaties, we understand that Israel and Egypt peace treaty is guided by the word respect. The content is filled with concerns about safety, trying to cease the extreme fighting and mutual annihilation. It predicts security based on reciprocity. Each country recognized the national interest of the other and balanced it with their own national interests. The Jordan Peace Treaty, however, was celebrated after 28 years with no war. Therefore, it emphasizes the terms of partnership, cooperation, as they had a better understanding of each other's needs and what each other understood as a threat. It is based on formal diplomatic relations, political, economic, social, cultural, and human interactions. Therefore, these treaties had two impacts: the establishment of peace with Israel by Arab Muslim states and determining what kind of peace one can have with another country. As for the Abraham Accords, it is different. It realized that pragmatic issues can be solved without considering ideology. It's the proof that peace can be celebrated with Israel without American intervention, even though they had the mediation of the USA. The context, as I have exposed, began before, very much before. Therefore, this is a culmination of several interactions over the last decades. The Abraham Accords might have been the start of a new regional order of a Middle East more intertwined economically, environmentally, socially. The Abraham Fund was created for its infrastructure and energy programs, and there was the creation of the Joint Statement on Women, Peace and Diplomacy. Therefore, the Abraham Accords are changing the security geopolitics on the Middle East. Israel, with these accords, is near the Saudi Arabia. So, what can we conclude? That there is an innovation between Israel, between the Abraham Accords and the peace treaties. The peace treaties have been instrumental in improving the peace established. Israel and Egypt are positive balancing. Jordan and Israel are positive soft balancing as national capabilities were developed. The Abraham Accords are not peace treaties, but as there was never war between Israel and Gulf monarchies, military capabilities are improving, which makes a positive hard balancing, but there has been cooperation on economics and social levels being a soft balancing. Therefore, the Abraham Accords are a positive hard and soft balancing. This was my presentation. I thank you for your attention and am ready to answer some questions.
Thank you very much. It was great for theory and case studies PhD. It was nice. And from now on, I would like to ask about why did you skip the bandwagoning? Because there is no bandwagoning in the Middle East from the international system change. Just think about it, that will be my question. Not now, later. Okay. Thank you very much. I will prefer to have the questions after all the presentation completed, because it will be unfair treatment if the questions will be more to one presenter and the less for the other one. So we will have all the questions later. I will now give the floor to Professor Vítor Fernandes. Yeah, you can start now. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. And well as well. I'm sorry, I'm not able to connect to internet, so I can't show you any slides, but that's fine. You'll go as okay. And well, this is very much still a work in progress in any way. Probably more work in progress, but so be it. The title of the presentation is China as a regional, as a Middle East power. Sorry. Clearly, we're seeing China clearly increasing its presence in the Middle East, when somehow the US seems to be taking a little bit the opposite direction, although it may change relatively soon. And given this China position, my argument is that we should look at China as a Middle East regional power. And obviously, as this goes on, you will have a significant impact, I think, in terms of change in the international system. Now, to be honest and to be fair, China has had a long-standing interest in the region. If you look back to the 80s, for example, China was essentially trying to isolate Taiwan, as Taiwan was trying to get better relations with some of the countries as in the Arabian Peninsula, obviously trying to show it's an independent country, and it has its foreign policy based on showing that it still is the case. Then if you look at the 80s, with the Iraq-Iran war, China actually supplied weapons to both countries at that time. But I mean, since then and presently, what we have is a Chinese government very much maintaining friendly relationships with most, if not all, of the countries in the region, and very good diplomatic and trading relations, in fact. Now, to be fair as well, it has also showed some interest and concern over the Palestinian cause, despite tensions in the region between some of the countries relative to that. But the most two interesting cases, and also with this one, is in fact the good diplomatic and trading relations with Iran. This is particularly significant given the US relation with Iran. Now, Iran, as you all know, is a permanent member of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization since 2021. To some extent, we can argue that China takes advantage of Iran's international isolation. But as was mentioned before as well, China was also able to mediate an agreement between Saudi Arabia and Iran towards a normalization of relations, which is quite significant as well. Now, we can all argue that this is very much driven by energy needs, because we know China has tremendous energy needs relative to oil, relative to gas. This is something that started well before, but it sort of accelerated very much since 2013 as Xi Jinping came to power in China. And indeed, the Middle East represents roughly 47, nearly half, 50% of China's imported oil and 12% of its gas needs. I mean, for example, we have about 23% of Saudi Arabia oil exports go to China, 20%, 22% of Iraqi oil exports go to China, nearly 10% of UAE sales of energy goes well to China, and 14% of Qatari liquid natural gas sales. So it is an important issue. Energy is a major concern, and there is obviously an interest driven by energy needs. My argument is also that it goes beyond that, actually well beyond that, because in fact, China is presently one of the main trading partners of several countries in the Middle East. A lot of it has to do with the Belt and Road Initiative, obviously. Most of the countries that I'm talking about, Arab countries, are members of the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council. And presently, Chinese trade with the Arab world stands at more than $245 billion, which is a 700% increase since 2004. Now, in March 21, there was also an agreement to invest $400 billion in Iran over 25 years. Energy, but many other fields as well, which also shows the strategic commitment here, and that is important to note. Interestingly as well, and very interesting as well, I think, is that apart from Iran, there's also a very close relationship with Israel. Because Chinese foreign direct investment in Israel amounted to over 8 billion between 2010 and 2019, which in fact makes China the second largest foreign investor in Israel after the US, obviously. There was a visit by Xi Jinping to Israel in 2017, and with all the improvements in foreign direct investment, Chinese in foreign direct investment with Israel and trading that took place, Prime Minister Netanyahu called the situation, and I quote, a marriage made in heaven, end of quote, which was quite interesting as well. Not sure how the US swallowed all this, but now, if you look at the products involved, we're talking about high-tech surveillance systems, dual-use technologies, but also infrastructure, ports, to mention a good example. And in fact, China is the first exporter to Israel, with over 19 billion in 2022, which I think is about double the US, which is the second one. Now, one of the issues that I think is important to note in all this is that obviously, and this is referred to by many countries, as we know, is that China does not attempt to interfere with those countries' domestic affairs, with political regimes. This obviously facilitates this establishment of cooperating relations between all those countries. It doesn't generate, namely, ontological concerns, ontological security concerns, which is also important. And looking at history, recent and not so recent, this sort of comes from what was called the spiritual socialism. Hu Jintao used to use this expression. Hu Jintao, as you remember, was president between 2003 and 2013, just before Xi Jinping. And this actually goes back to the sort of logic of harmony without conformity and uniformity. Follows Confucius, or goes back to the Zhou dynasty, which is like 1500 before Christ, and goes very much back to the whole logic of the Xiaoping, which is, in a sense, a Chinese soft power that is very different from the US soft power, namely as characterized by Zhou Enlai, that we all know. We could talk about that as well. Obviously, we have periods of China being more open or less open. We can think of the Tang dynasty in the 7th and 8th century versus the Qing dynasty, which is the last dynasty from the imperial China. You can think of the Opium Wars, the first and the second. So I have different periods here without having really a period of imperial China, if you will. Now, clearly, China seems determined to be if not the major power in the region, probably other regions as well. We know what China has been doing. And I mean, I think this is important to put in context to see what sort of US reaction we will have on the one hand, but how this will transform the regional order, but also the international order as a whole. And I thank you for your time, and I'll be happy to discuss and answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was great. You are on time. I would like to have my comment on that as well. So the question I was asking after all the presentation completed is that is it possible that China could success to bring the Israel and Iran together like it did between Saudi Arabia and Iran? So if it is this international systemic power change, then now the role making and the role modeling of the Middle East politics will be China. That was my question, and I will move. You join us late, so I will give the floor first, Ihsanullah, and then you are going to be the last one. Ihsanullah, can you hear us? You can now start your presentation if you are ready to go.
All right.
And you can share your PowerPoint if you want, if you have one, anyway.
I would just present it without the PowerPoint.
Okay. You have
Is it okay?
15 minutes. Okay, thank you very much. Go for it.
Okay. So thank you, Professor Rahman, distinguished professors, colleagues, and guests. The topic I'm going to present is the 5 factors of securitization and the decline of Afghanistan as a nation state. So I have divided my presentation in 5 segments, which each segment I will be discussing it in detail. So in the introduction, Afghanistan has multiple threats, particularly non-traditional security threats. And these threats could be categorized as a security, economic, political, social, and climate change. And also, the Taliban have serious challenges from the Islamic State Khorasan and other anti-Taliban group, which are mainly Afghan militia groups. So the Taliban contain actually the threats of the Islamic State Khorasan, but the jihadi group is not yet completely eradicated from Afghanistan. And Afghanistan is also known for regional and global rivalries. That is another things that which could probably expand this jihadi movement to carry out attacks. Then we don't see any differences between the Taliban of 0.1, which they acquired the power in 1990, and also the Taliban of 0.2. So Taliban of 0.1 prevented girls and women from going to schools and work, and the Taliban of 0.2 did the same. They are also ideological. The 0.1 and Taliban of 0.2 has also been ideological. And the decisions are being taken in Kandahar. The top leadership are taking the decision with no policy change seen on site. Previously, the Kandahar leadership also took the decision, and currently they're also taking the decision. The Taliban actually they use the force against any threat, and they have zero tolerance for anyone who raise voice or challenge the Taliban authority. The Taliban could potentially be a driving force for the recruitment by the Islamic State and other anti-Taliban movement, as was documented by Antonio Gustizo in 2020 in his book that Al-Qaeda sought to establish relation with ISKP in Afghanistan due to the Taliban being in agreement with the United States. And Al-Qaeda also labels some of the Taliban as the Pakistani intelligence agency spies and promote anti-jihad narrative in Afghanistan. And Al-Qaeda also called these people or these members of the Taliban leadership as treacherous. In Afghanistan, the throne shall be achieved through using military force. So each time when there is a group that wants to take power is actually using a force. And some of the groups, they do play in the hands of the foreign countries or also receive funds from the foreign countries. And this is a non-changeable attitude of the Afghan politician. Now, what method I have used, I take the original sources, including the interviews of the Taliban top leadership with Afghan TVs in Pashto and Dari languages, which are mainly two languages of Afghanistan, and sources from the local Afghan news website as well as international agencies, international news agencies. I also use secondary sources, book, scholar, article, etc. So the method mainly is analyzing the 5 factors of securitization, considering the condition and the situation that has been evolving in Afghanistan. So these 5 factors are crucial in the examination of Afghanistan after decades of war and conflict. So a research question, what research question? I have 3 research questions. What are the primary security factors that will likely contribute to the collapsing state of Afghanistan? The second is how the Taliban as the de facto authority will respond to the crisis that unfolded after their forceful takeover of Afghanistan. And does the Taliban regime have the capacity to securitize emerging threats in Afghanistan? So the result in discussion, so what are the security threats to Afghanistan? The security threats mainly are Islamic State Khorasan, Al-Qaeda, anti-Taliban Afghan groups. However, the Taliban have made alliance with other jihadi groups that had threatened the survival of Afghanistan, particularly the Al-Qaeda, but that still is considered a threat to the survival of Afghanistan. So at the same time, the Taliban movement also fight other jihadi groups, such as Islamic State Khorasan. And basically the ideology, the jihadi ideology is based on a promotion of their hardcore Sharia and law principles. And any movement that abandons Sharia and law implementation is inviting problems. In such case, the Taliban as nationalistic forces, some of the media or scholars call them. So other jihadists could promote the ideology of Sharia and law in their countries. And also there has been different reports by United Nations Security Council, the war, Islamic State, and other transnational militant groups could bandwagon against the Taliban. It could fight the Taliban. Then, so the militant group could expand its recruitment pool among the various jihadists to become their allies and also recruit Afghans into their ranks. Now, the Islamic State is a follower of Salafi ideology. The Salafi resentment as a result of the Taliban crackdown on them, since many ISKP militant or Salafi adherents could result in joining the Islamic State militant group. The Taliban at the same time will unlikely be moderated to cooperate with regional countries. And meanwhile, the Taliban regime would not want regional or global powers to be involved in Afghanistan as a counter-terrorism partner. So then in Taliban, we have the division between the Taliban. There are 2 types of the Taliban, the moderate one and the hardliner one. The division is basically on the interpretation of Sharia and law, the tafsir. As the supreme leader of the Taliban stated, if the minister, quote, if the minister does not show obedience to him, he will join a more pious group, end quote. This shows that the Taliban top leadership is in the hands of the hardliners. The pragmatic Taliban enjoy the support of the Afghan public, while hardliners inside the Taliban movement are policymakers who are more extreme in their interpretation of the Sharia and law. These hardliners are non-negotiable individuals. In some, the division, the moderate group claims to have contemporary interpretation of Sharia and law, while the hardliners strongly believe on the traditional interpretation of the Sharia law in Afghanistan. Now, the political threats. The Taliban represent only themselves as the political owner of Afghanistan. Moderate faces inside the Taliban have no decision-making authority. The movement also exclude moderate Afghan politicians. All the ministers are ideologically Taliban and adhere to the ideology of the movement. Anyone who does not adhere to the ideology of the Taliban cannot become a minister or occupy a senior position in the Taliban de facto authority. The Taliban assumed that Western occupation actually have corrupted the Afghan society. Trusting these corrupt politicians will corrupt the entire movement of the Taliban. And it's not ideologically feasible for them to allow these politicians to be included in the government. And then they have the extreme ideology that has halted their international recognition of the Taliban government. Other components of the Afghan society, especially the moderate, has been left out. Result is that no international recognition to the Taliban government. So I quote, a government for the Taliban by the Taliban. Ideological adherence is considered as the principal rule for any incentive, including political or economic. Social stability. So what is the condition of social stability in Afghanistan? The movement has prevented girls and women from going to school, universities.
Sorry for interruption. You have 5 minutes left.
All right.
It's better to come to the conclusion closely.
All right.
Thank you.
So in conclusion, my analysis revolves around the 5 factors, which are political, security, economic, and also climate change and social. So a single element of these one cannot be securitized factor to serve as a solitary base for the state building. All of these are interconnected with each other. And this is proven by the fact that the Taliban regime has not been recognized globally. So I thank you very much. And if you have any question or comments, I'm glad to answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was an interesting subject, but you have added your 5 security threats list as one of them is security. So I didn't get it. So could you please specify your 5 security threats in Taliban regime in Afghanistan? But that's my question for the later. Thank you very much. And now it's turn. Nergis, are you ready to go? Yeah, you have 15 minutes to go. Thank you.
Thank you. I need to change glasses. Good afternoon, or rather morning. It's a pleasure to be here. What I'm going to be presenting today is part of ongoing work on assessment of the problem of statelessness in the Middle East, particularly since the Arab Spring events, but also in light of the developments regarding Afghanistan. So I've published some of this work, but what I would like to share with you today is my fieldwork notes from Jordan and Lebanon, which I undertook this particular year, about a month in Lebanon and about a month in Jordan, where I actually interviewed several academics and human rights lawyers and members of the community who represent statelessness, as well as ministers who deal with the issue. So there is a common misconception suggesting that stateless people are just refugees and you don't need to do anything special about them. And unfortunately, this is not the case, especially in the Middle East as a region, as a hub that is heavily populated by in and out movements of forced displacement. But more so, there's an amnesia about previous waves of people who come in and who are still currently stateless, or people who were rendered stateless, such as the Palestinian population, who then become basically pro forma
labor force across the Middle East without the actual acknowledgement of their statelessness. So the term that I use throughout the work is actually the the long shadow of statelessness or shadow citizenship. The international legal framework is idealistic. Every person has a de jure right to belong to a state and or to have access to rights and publicly acknowledged as a member of a community. And then there are several programs developed by UNHCR, including the known and stateless with a certain set date for the stateless populations to be zeroed across the world. Most of these arrangements actually target bilateral groups. So let's say if a group has been exiled from a particular state and then UNHCR gets involved in terms of brokering an agreement so that the citizenship laws are changed and then they're taken back. Unfortunately, very large groups such as the Rohingya still kind of dangle in the air without any such UNHCR or UN resolution being readily available. The problem in the Middle East is of a different scale. What I've discovered is that there are layers of stateless populations. And so let's say the Palestinian population in Lebanon is reaching their fourth generation, still being de facto and de jure stateless. In Jordan, the Iraqi population is reaching their third generation, still de jure and de facto stateless. And in Turkey, there are other groups which are more recent incoming groups who are de facto and de jure stateless. So I'm going to discuss some of the things that really caught my attention. Suffice to say, I've done work on the Syrian exodus. I've done work on international criminal law and crimes against humanity and mass dispossessions and population exchanges. So this particular issue constituted a conundrum for me. It didn't fit into any of the things that I thought I knew. So one of the challenges was that, especially in Jordan and Lebanon, although the numbers are quite large of people who are not protected under guest status or temporary protection order or labor arrangements, the stateless population is considered as part of the demographic. So the numbers are known and they're managed and they're given specific kinds of access to public services, but there is no political will or arrangement for the status of being stateless to be ended. It is taken for granted that this is the way it is until and unless they move either back to countries such as Syria or Afghanistan, or they will just continue to live the way they do, or they are resettled by UNHCR to a third country, possibly European or North American, or maybe Australian, New Zealand, where they might be given a new citizenship. So it's kind of taken as is, and then there are no policy incentives or major arrangements in terms of decrees or changes in citizenship laws. So this is Lebanon. In Jordan, the general acceptance is that the people who declare themselves as Syrians, and then there are very close historical ties between Jordan and Syria in that sense, because Syrians have been laborers in Jordan for a very long time. The people who come after the uprisings are assumed de facto as Syrians. Some of them could be confirmed to be Syrian citizens through embassy confirmations and paperwork. But for others, especially the children who are born into intermarriages, which is quite common, by the way, the police issues a paper that declares that the child is born in Jordan to a supposedly Syrian parent and then a supposedly perhaps Palestinian parent. And then there's a document for the birth of the child, but that child has no chance of getting Jordanian citizenship in the long run, especially in the case of intermarriages. In Turkey, Turkey is one of the most organized recipients of global displacement and dispossession. I'm not even going to get into the numbers because the official numbers, many agree, including the International Organization of Migration, is significantly lower than what's going on in the market. So you have what we call floating people. You have people who have expired registrations and yet work in the labor market. You have illegal residencies. You've got children who are born but not registered. You've got people who come in with visitor visas who never left, who are actually living on the ground. And it is not only from the Middle East, and this is a very good crowd to discuss that, basically from the Turkic republics to Afghanistan, to Syria, Iran, Jordan, not Jordan, I'm sorry. Yeah, what did I say? Iran, Iraq. Now the Russian young men are actually escaping military duty. They're all coming in, and most of them are not enumerated. So obviously, majority of these people are not stateless. They're just people on the move. They do have a passport, or they do have the grounds to prove that they have citizenship. But there is a group which are and have been stateless for multiple generations. Some of them are Iraqis, again, basically emanating from the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Multiple generations. The distribution of citizenship in these cases are discretionary. There's an asset policy. And the interviews that I had with Syrians who are settled in Turkey also confirmed that the distribution of citizenship for the millions who are in there are actually discretionary. There's no set rules in terms of who gets citizenship. And when and under what circumstances. Some are allowed family reunion, which means they can bring their parents. Some are not allowed that. Afghanis, especially Afghani youth, are registered as temporary guests, and then they have work permits. But those who actually emigrated to Pakistan, came back to Afghanistan, then left Afghanistan, they don't have Pakistani or Afghani citizenship that they can prove. The Russians coming from the Turkic republics, some of them, I spent 2 months in Budapest this summer looking at population movements, forced population movements and statelessness in the former Soviet Union and present Russian Federation. You've got the very similar problem. You've got minorities in certain Turkic states who left to go back to their original land, but they were not accepted there, and then they couldn't get into Russian Federation, and some of them are actually residing currently in Turkey, and then those people do not have either Russian Federation citizenship or the Turkic Republic citizenship that they originally had. The intricacies of the citizenship laws in the Russian context is mind-boggling, but nonetheless. So there are these populations. And then in Jordan, again, there are Kurdish populations and Assyrian populations and Druze who were not included in the 1925 census. And in Lebanon, there's a similar problem about the census not being repeated since 1930s, because Lebanon is a consociational state, and if they repeat the census, they're worried that the balance of power in the parliament will change, and therefore all these things are estimates by NGOs, INGOs, or members of the state bureaucracy. So what am I trying to do with the project? I'm trying to look at new phases of statelessness in the Middle East, not as a transitory problem, but as something that the region basically accepted as normal. And when I was working in Lebanon, my translator and the person who helped me was a Palestinian Lebanese and he was third generation, I think, stateless, and he married an Armenian Lebanese woman, and he cannot get citizenship from a woman. It's the same in Jordan. You cannot get citizenship from a Jordanian woman. So intermarriages with Syrians, with Palestinians in the Jordanian and Lebanon context, basically requires quite a bit of sacrifice on the part of the woman, because the child who is born into these marriages is also rendered stateless. So my Palestinian interlocutor, he had a son of 5 years old, and then they were trying to get the son Armenian citizenship so that the child can actually attend university in Armenia and can have citizenship. So this is just like a very micro example of how multi-generational this issue is, and there are kind of local solutions provided. So what happens to stateless people? I mean, a lot of the work, which is going to become a book manuscript, talks about where these people live, how many minutes to, okay, and where they work and so I mean, in all three countries, and I want to extend it to Egypt as well, but I need funding to do that. Because it's not easy to go and actually approach people and earn their trust, and then for them to give the information to you. The understanding is that they have rights. So the society at large and the bureaucracy claim that stateless people in the Middle East have rights, and then that's okay. Like they're not in dire straits. And so when you ask questions like, can they be employed by the state? No. Can they become teachers? No. Can they become conscripts in the army? No. Can they become doctors? No. Lawyers? No. None of these people can actually have access to. The other issue is when they have children, what happens to their citizenship? Can they get citizenship? No. Can they own property? In some places, yes. In some places, no. I think in general, there's kind of, it's amiable. They can own property because that's a different legislation. Can they work? Jordan and Lebanon, yes, of course. Turkey, rotating work permits, indefinitely renewed. What happens to the children in terms of education? Bare minimum education they have access to. Beyond that, then it's not going to happen, with the exception of Palestinians in Jordan and Lebanon. They are given a special status for having education. Now, if you're a Palestinian stateless person educated in Lebanon or Jordan, can you be employed within mainland Jordan and Palestine? No. You have to go back to the camps or settlements where you can actually be employed. So my puzzlement continues. That's how I'm going to end. I think we live in the region in a state of full awareness of statelessness. And our understanding is that it is an extension of multiple regional wars. And it is considered as a way of extending hospitality en masse to populations, whereby we each hope either they'll go back or they'll move on, or if not, they'll continue to live. And so it really goes against the instinct of refugee rights, the citizenship rights and whatnot. But I'm not here to kind of put blame on the Middle Eastern states. It's just that this is the status quo as it is. Thank you.
Thank you very much. When I first read the title of your presentation, I thought the ethnic-centric statelessness, because it is nationality studies, that a state is subject as a nation without state. But you have mentioned that there is a regional and international issue. Its statelessness is not just can be limited with the nation. Actually, it is multinational or the transnational perspective we need to have for that. Thank you very much. Quite interesting. We are going to have our last presenter. He is Carlos Martins, professor.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you for technical support for helping me. Yes. So we have my name is Carlos Martins from Brazil. Technological Institute of Education in Brazil, ISUPAR, in Portuguese name. And my presentation is about the geopolitical contest between Brazil, the United States, and the Islamic Republic of Iran. The case of ships retained at the Paranaguá port in 2019. So the presentation map. This research aims to analyze the Brazil participation in the economic embargoes imposed unilaterally by the United States of America against the Iran. It seeks to understand the expected behavior of Brazil in the international relations, notably in the last historic period after 2018, when the current Brazilian government inaugurates what the analysts called automatic alignment with the U.S. government. So we are talking about Jair Bolsonaro and Donald Trump in the period of history of Brazil and the United States that have this automatic alignment, despite of the economic interests of Brazil. The research aims to understand how Brazil alignment may influence in its international relations with other global actors, notably partners in the Europe community and the countries of Middle East. Like I said, this period in 2 years, 3 years, the Brazilian government and the President Donald Trump and President Jair Bolsonaro had a particular alignment, despite of the Brazilian interest in the geo-economic, global geo-economic, and this is the case. We know that the United States have 15 states. In Brazil, we say that Jair Bolsonaro try make Brazil like the 51 state, one more star in the flag of United States of America. Of course, this is a way to say that Brazil was in the alignment was not correct. Is deleterious to the economic interest of Brazil. So we had the Bivand and Termet, two vessels, two cargo ships that was in Brazil. And these vessels had problems in 2019. These names were known due to the undue retention by the Brazilian government under the influence of the American government. What happened? The Brazilian government do not authorize the bunker station, and these two vessels loading corn beans was retained for 2 months in Brazil. And this was a very problematic to relations of Brazil with another countries. Brazil, the commercial partnership between Brazil and Iran, and then this is creating 6.37 million tons to Iran, representing $1.9 billion business volume, to represent just over 27.8% of the total export by Brazil. As you know, Brazil is an exporter of commodities, corn, beans, and others. And when you do not authorize vessels with Iran flag, use Brazilian banker, so we have a problem with other countries that don't agree with this thing. Trade balance between 19 and 20. In the last 10 years, the turnover went from 1.76 to $6.37 billion. In addition to corn, Brazil sells soybeans and beef with a trade balance largely favorable to Brazil interests. So when you have the graphics shows that we have more exportations to Iran than importation, of course. And when you use the domestic politics between Donald Trump and Jair Bolsonaro to cause the serious dangerous damage to the economic the balance of economic Brazil. The vessels remained parked in the Brazilian port for 50 days when, due to the decision by the Brazilian court, Supreme Court, invoking international law, was ordered forced to lift, allowing the vessels to be supplied and the journey to continue. So after the STF, the Supreme Court of Brazil, interview authorizing the bunker station, the vessels can go to Iran with the corn beans cargo. So in the last, we need to say that Brazil and the United States not a part in the international business of corn beans. The Brazil and the United States are competitions in this area. So there are no reasonable reasons to Brazil make agreements with the United States government to block cargoes of corn beans from Brazil to Iran. Of course, it was a decision by the Jair Bolsonaro that was called Trump from tropics in that period. This is.
That's enough. Thank you. Thank you very much. We have completed all the presenters, and we are now gonna start Q&A session. I would like to have the questions from you, not myself, but I have already mine ready in case you don't ask. It's fine. So, and we have one more presentation on the screen, at least in the Zoom meeting. So the people who can who want to ask a question from the online participants, they can write the chat section, and you can just check it out and tell me if they are asking any question. So physically and online, you can ask questions to any participants and anyone who wants to ask the first question. You are ready to go with. Okay, so.
Thank you to all the presenters. My question is to Dr. Fernandes. Thank you for your presentation. You were talking something about China's role in the Middle East, right? Professor, I would like to know your take, because China is coming up with very fancy concept, GCI, GDI. These are alternative concepts which challenges the Western order, the already established order. So from your paper, I would want to understand, what do you conclude? Whether China is an influential player, or is it trying to break through in the Middle East? Or how far will China be successful as an influential power in the Middle East? Yeah.
For your question, I mean, clearly, there have been, particularly since Xi Jinping, an attempt that is, I think, relatively successful to spread out influence in several regions. We've seen that through several platforms. And you have the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, you have the BRI, you have the BRICS, I mean, all kinds of platforms. Clearly, it's been successful in the Middle East, given the increase in trade and foreign direct investment, particularly with countries that are either clear adversaries / enemies of the fun, yeah. Oh, closer, right? Okay. Thank you. Sorry about that. To the US or very close like Israel. So it's quite significant, I think, that in addition to all the other countries, Saudi Arabia and so on and so forth, all the Arab countries, China is able to connect very closely with these two particular countries, Iran on the one hand and Israel. And in fact, in bringing Saudi Arabia and Iran together, which is quite significant as well. So it clearly is spreading out its influence, taking over. This is also a region where Russia already had a lot of influence, particularly in regions like Syria and others. So I mean, that sort of relates also, in my mind, from my perspective, with the war in Ukraine, because there's a geostrategic issue that has not been often talked about, but which is quite clear. Now, this is, I think, when we look at this order thing, just spread out a little bit more based on your question. We have two kinds of power, if you will, in play. One is military power. The other one is economic power. This economic power is sort of latent power. It can ultimately be transformed, partially at least, into military power. So all this influence that is taking place goes in the direction of change in the international order from an economic point of view, meaning that ultimately, I believe that we can be moving relatively fast towards a multipolar world in the economic or / latent perspective, which is not the same to say that we have a multipolar world, given that, in fact, the only country that really has military power to act in at least one major region, apart from the one where it is the United States. So what I'm saying here in terms of international order, and that is that you can have a multipolar latent economic power world, but still be in unipolarity from a conventional definition military power perspective. Am I making sense here? Yeah. Does that answer your question? Sure.
China would be playing a major role in the Middle East, or India would counterbalance it?
Well, again, I mean, China already is playing a major role in the region. I mean, India wants to play as well. That goes towards this idea of multipolar economic or latent power world, if you will. Obviously, these countries are also militarizing. India is militarizing, China is militarizing. They're trying to, challenge the international order as a whole from a military point of view as well. But they're still very, very far away from, the gap is huge compared to the US. They're doing that more effectively from an economic point of view compared to a military point of view. And obviously, India is playing its role. It's also in BRICS, it's also in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and so on and so forth. Still, I still consider that China is far ahead from India at this point in time. Thank you.
Okay, guys. We have a question, online question, then I will give you the floor here. Ihsanullah, can you hear me? You have your own question on your screen. I think you can see it on the chat side on your right.
Yeah, you can see it.
You can just read. Can you?
Okay, so now
you read the question.
Oh, nice question.
You,
Nice
you
question.
know the question,
Roshan.
and the person who
Yeah,
needs to answer the question.
it's on my screen. So basically, the Taliban and the United States, they had an agreement in Doha. The component of agreement was that the US would withdraw, and then after the withdrawal, there will be like a negotiation between the different faction, but that does not result it somehow because of the Taliban continuous military offenses in different parts of the country. And at the moment, the Taliban actually feels, and they believe on this one, that we are stronger militarily, and we do not want any political settlement with other groups or with the other Afghans. Yes, they can come and they can live in country, but they will have a non-political movement. I mean, they would not participate in politics. And recently there was report that they also banned political parties in Afghanistan. So there is no political parties currently in Afghanistan except the IEA, the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. So that's the one part of your question. The second part of your question is mediation efforts. I could not understand this one, but Afghanistan is currently at peace with itself. To be honest, this is true. The Taliban have carried out so many counter-terror operations against the Islamic, and they have degraded the capability of Islamic State, and they are strong in doing that one. So there's a peace in the country. There is no inter-resistant group, no other jihadi element that could threaten the Taliban survival. But the important thing is that this condition, the current condition, could rapidly change in the foreseeable future. We cannot guarantee that the Taliban will remain the same today. They might change the Afghan people or those who are like the National Resistance Front, led by the son of Ahmad Shah Massoud. He could also get support from the regional countries or from the globe to start military operation. But it is unlikely at the present. It is unlikely. It could change in the future. I hope I have answered your question.
Well, I need to ask another question. You said that the Afghanistan is in peace with itself now. So what do you mean with that? Don't you think that there is any issues in Afghanistan because of the Taliban regime or Taliban government? Which one would you prefer?
I mean by itself with itself that there is no war. Previously, we had casualties of 40 per day from the military, 60, 70, even 200, 300. We had these war casualties, but there is no war right now. So Afghanistan is peace with itself. But as I said, the non-traditional.
You mean no war?
Currently, there is no
peace,
war.
You mean no war?
No, but what I mean is like there are other non-traditional security factors, which are like the economics, the condition, the humanitarian catastrophe. Afghanistan is going through worse humanitarian crisis. The Afghan assets have been freezed by the US, so it affects on the economy. There's a poverty, there's a unemployment. So these non-traditional security could impact on the recruitment by the group, like I mentioned, Islamic State, and also the other group, which are the anti-Taliban Afghan group.
Okay, thank you. And another question from online perspective. So, yeah, well,
Can I just come back to my answer very, very quickly? I'm sorry about this. It relates to your question, and we have a huge uncertainty here that is worth thinking about, which is China's slowdown. Because China is slowing down, and that sort of creates uncertainties with regards to how it's going to play out from now on, from here onwards. I mean, ultimately, to the point that if you have China slowing down, for example, like to 3% growth for a few years, that, according to some Chinese specialists, could in effect endanger the regime itself, and Xi Jinping. So we have a lot of uncertainties here. But I mean, for the time being, it's playing out the way, I mean, I think it is. And we'll just have to, time will tell how right or wrong I am.
I don't think so. That's gonna be the third question, and I don't want to have a
talk later.
dialogue. Okay, so you can talk to after the session. And we have a question here. Yeah, thank you.
Good morning. Well, my question relates to that topic of this Middle Eastern power play. It's yes, to Professor Vítor Fernandes. Well, and what about the United States? I've got a sense that they lost interest to some extent in the region. Am I right or not? And if they lost interest, why? Or they didn't lost interest, but they have no longer capability to exert more explicit influence because they are involved in Ukraine and in Taiwan. How does this relate? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your question. I mean, obviously, I mean, the US is always a major player in the region, but it's sort of, to some extent, I think, losing out towards other countries like China and India, but particularly China. I mean, to some extent, they were, or they have been, losing interest. But what I've seen from the Biden administration is sort of like a zigzag strategy. I mean, look, for example, Saudi Arabia. First, it's a pariah country. Now they become great friends again. So there's a sort of catching up, if you will, on the part of the US trying to come back and then trying to make efforts to join. There's a huge effort going on to join Saudi Arabia and Israel on the Accords, which is actually being highly contested by some sectors in the US, because it's like he's selling out the US in terms of security compromise with a country like Saudi Arabia, which on the back of the whole issue of promoting democracy and freedom and so on and so forth is not sort of being taken very, very, very nicely. But I mean, I think the US is always a major player. It's trying to catch up. It's not as involved as it used to be, or at least it doesn't want to be as involved as it used to be. Now it's involved with the war in Ukraine in a much stronger way than I think people believe. Because I mean, there are, in terms of connections, in terms of logistics, there's a huge effort to help out Ukraine. And of course, there's China. I mean, the China threat is much, much more important than what is playing out in the Middle East. And the question is, overstretch. I mean, the US at some point in time will not be able to be looking out for China and the China rise and Taiwan with all its efforts, then Middle East and being all over the place. So, I mean, there's a risk of some overstretch in the sense of huge effort to be in all areas. But I mean, I think it's trying to come back slowly to the Middle East to sort of balance in a way what's happening from on the part of China and India as well. Thank you.
A question? Yeah, go for it.
So thank you very much for all your speeches. They were all very interesting. I'm Ana Belén Perianes from Spain. I'm a doctor in peace and international security. I would like to ask to Professor Ihsanullah, please, online. Yeah. In terms of Taliban regime, I would like to know if there is any significant difference between hard and moderate Taliban according to the violation of human rights, according to the situation of women. Just as you mentioned that they are out of power, is there any significant difference according to human rights, how they see the violation of women's human rights? Thank you.
Thank you. Nice question. By the way, The difference is not very much, like I said in my presentation. The difference is on the interpretation of the Sharia law. So the moderate Taliban actually, they interpret the Sharia law according to the contemporary condition, according to contemporary international politics and all of those things, while the hardliners, they are extreme. They believe on the traditional interpretation of the Sharia law. So that is how the tussle is, but there is no deep division actually. There is no sign of deep division which could lead into the fighting between these two factions. No, that does not. There is no such kind of division among them. They even criticize one another when it comes to the education of girls, and also women. They do that one frequently, but they also have the sense that if we do not allow girls to get education, their regime could be in a downing state, and they could collapse as other government collapse in the country. So the human rights, most of these reports on the human rights, they are not fully, these reports are emerging, but the Taliban have full control when these such reports emerge. So last week I saw a report from the human rights. They even criticized the 6,000 artificial intelligence camera, which was installed by the Taliban regime with the support of Huawei of China. So most of these human rights reports are not very credible. Yes, the women are being oppressed. There is no doubt about that one. They have not been allowed to go to education, to go to work. That is a serious issue for the Taliban. And it's not only a serious issue for the Taliban, but for the rest of Afghanistan. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Otherwise, to go for it. Thank you. You don't have to have time. Just ask.
Sorry, what?
Go for it.
Okay, well, thank you all for your presentations. I just have a question for Nergis, and I was wondering to what extent states that actually deny citizenship to the population you described actually use this denial on the local or international scene, and what would be the arguments, what would be their positions on that? For example, I think of Daeshi children from Daesh members that are denied Iraqi citizenship, for example. That's for obvious reasons, I guess. But could you elaborate on your case studies, please? Thank you.
Can we have it one by one, and you'll answer it?
It's related.
Okay.
It's related, but it's about the European countries. As long as I know, in Portugal as example, people from Palestine that are living in Portugal that acquire the Portuguese citizenship in their passport, in Portuguese passport, the nationality, country of origin, the Portuguese authorities put this as unknown. My question is this a violation of the resolution of the UN that about the recognition of the state of Palestine? Once a European country is not recognizing the country of origin of this citizen?
Thank you to both questions. About the denial of citizenship. Most of these cases, okay, there are two categories. One, the country might have in its own history clusters of stateless people that they somehow refuse to deal with, not just the Palestinians, but there are the Druze, there are the Kurds, there are the Assyrians in the Jordanian and Lebanese case, and in the Turkish case, there are also a number of mixed marriage children from across the border, and so the state basically turns a blind eye, and most of these children There are actually literary texts written about these people. Maybe this generation does not remember in Turkish Yaşar ne yaşar ne yaşamaz, that these are the kind of plays whereby the child is born without citizenship, lives without citizenship, and dies without citizenship, and then there's like no record of this person. So it's not actual denial, it's not a policy of denial per se, it's more like the state's hand refuses to get engaged, and so you do need a lot of advocacy on behalf of these groups. And the human rights people that I have been working with, they say sometimes it takes 20 years in the court to just get one person acknowledged as a member of that nationality, despite the fact that perhaps their parents were already documented to live in the country, and then the child was not registered. What do they do at the international scene? Jordan is very proactive, and so is Turkey. They go out and ask for money. This is a new trend in forced migration, whereby you just say, there are chronic problems. It's not just about Syrians. We actually want money for the whole community. So when I was working in Jordan, I witnessed several times, same in Lebanon, same in Turkey, increasingly, is that when there are large sums of money allocated to new displaced populations, some of these are also used towards subaltern populations otherwise who are not refugees. So there are pockets of money allocated for stateless peoples, police, and whatnot, and they're kind of used as a point of leverage, saying, you know what, if we don't get the money to solve this case, then guess what, they're going to end up at the doors of Europe, and then that's always the perennial threat, right? About the Palestinians, UNRWA is very specific, and this has been an ongoing problem. Palestinian refugees are a special group of refugees who are determined only as refugees. As a refugee with Palestinian identity, it's basically close to impossible for you to apply for refugee hidden asylum elsewhere. So in the Portuguese case, if they got citizenship, it must be based on humanitarian and compassionate grounds. And at the level of UN, Palestine as a state is quasi-recognized, but most of the people that you're talking about might be Palestinian refugees from Lebanon, Palestinian refugees from Syria, Palestinian refugees from Egypt. And therefore they do not belong to the Palestinian territory. They're just at either occupied territories or outside for generations, and therefore the country is written as unknown. Now, in the Eastern European bloc, I've seen many cases of Russian Federation passports as well as Baltic passports, whereby the stateless person, they have a passport, but it says alien in it. Or it says country of origin
What about
unknown.
foreigner, not alien?
No, it says alien.
Really?
Yeah, it says alien very clearly, right? So these are also people who cannot claim citizenship, but they have a passport for travel purposes. In the Middle East, stateless people cannot travel. Full stop. Iraqis who came from Iraq back in 2003. The year is 2023, never left Lebanon, never left Jordan. They don't have travel documentation. Most of the Palestinians just cannot leave the national borders. When I asked about, would you go to Egypt? And then they said, no, I can't unless I'm smuggled. Like even in the Middle East, they have to have interlocutors for them to cross borders. So this is a real issue.
Okay. You have a question to whom? Okay. Then you will pass the microphone.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for your presentation. I would like to ask Carlos regarding Hezbollah in Brazil. That a few years ago, some studies identified that Hezbollah acted especially in the border between Argentina, Brazil, and Paraguay. Especially the U.S. also affirmed that Hezbollah acted there. And so my question is, in this case in particular, regarding the relationship between Brazil and the US, if Hezbollah also played a role in this, especially in terms of securitization in Brazil.
Yes, Hezbollah is there. WikiLeaks prevail shows it, and in Foz do Iguaçu city in Brazil, Paraguay in Argentina, we have bases of Hezbollah. We can say bases of Hezbollah because it's public, and the Brazilian government in the USA have cooperation about this subject to minimize, to avoid the activities of Hezbollah in Brazil. But this is probably it can be useful because the Hezbollah in that region is very strong. And I don't know if that connection with the case of the vessels. But in this case of the vessels, the Iran, they have no participation of the Hezbollah, the political of Hezbollah in that case of the vessels. We had was a case with the Donald Trump and Jair Bolsonaro, but the case of Hezbollah is a fact. We have the WikiLeaks showing the activities of the Hezbollah in Brazil and the collaboration of the United States. It is a good topic to collaboration. It's a really true and good topic collaboration to United States government, not persons, government of the United States and government of Brazil.
Okay, I think we have an online question here. Another one. I think it's to. Yeah. By the way, Roshan Taj, could you please clarify that to whom you are asked the question? And from here. To. So that's interesting. Yeah, go for it.
All right. So my question is about Russia's role. And China and Russia, at least from the outset, seems to be orchestrating their moves in the Middle East. And then there's kind of, I don't know, some understanding per se. And at least from some perspective, China, India, Russia, and to a degree Brazil seems to be kind of compacting to divide and then undertake certain operations and choose to invest. So could you talk about what's Russia doing in the midst of China expanding itself in the Middle East?
Thank you very much. And this all goes back to the very same idea that I to some extent talked about. What you have is clearly Russia. And this very much, from my point of view, relates to the war in Ukraine. Russia is a relatively powerful state in terms of influence within the Middle East. I mean, it has huge influence in Syria. It has good connections with many other countries, Iran, Saudi Arabia, all the Arab countries. So to some extent, is relatively similar in terms of diplomatic relations with the case of China. And obviously, from a geostrategic point of view, the war in Ukraine, the whole issue of Ukraine has to do with access to the Black Sea, to the Bosphorus, and to the Middle East and North Africa, which are areas that are of Russian influence. So obviously, having NATO on the Black Sea, every time you step in the water, with Ukraine in NATO is a major issue for Russia. So obviously, Russia wants to prevent that from the with the Ukrainian war. I mean, irrespective of other issues that I'm not going to talk about now. And also, it wants to preserve its influence in the Middle East. And China is increasing also its influence in the Middle East, like other countries you mentioned. Brazil, perhaps not so much, but very much so in Africa, India, the BRICS. I mean, we had the recent summit of the BRICS. We know how Brazilian foreign policy is playing out with Lula now with respect to all of this. But so, in essence, what I think we have is a large group of countries that really wants to challenge the current international order. That is very clear to me, to a point that, to some extent, we can even argue that this idea of liberal international order is not worldwide as we're always thought, but is really one regional order, and there are other regional orders that have been latent, and now, because of the issue of Ukraine, are becoming more evident and more clear. And all these countries, I mean, obviously, Lula won an election as well. So many countries are saying this is our time, but most of it, it's an economic influence, it's latent power. It's not in military terms. Obviously, they all know that China is a major U.S. concern. They also know that we will have U.S. elections, and already some of the issues regarding U.S. foreign policy under Biden are being highly challenged within several sectors of the U.S. The elections is in 1 year, roughly, even more than that. But I mean, a lot of things will start happening well before that, and may well influence the direction of U.S. foreign policy. But I mean, all I see here is a group of countries led by China, obviously, for obvious reasons, and given that Russia is under the conditions that we know with the war in Ukraine, but they're all part of a group with Brazil is playing its card in this. I mean, they all want to see a revision of the U.S. Security Council with permanent members, with this not a 45 order that led to the creation of the United Nations. They want more. I mean, the question is, what do they really want? In my sense, so far, is they want more room. They want a larger chair at the table. They are fed up with unipolarity in the sense of what we've seen, which is, in effect, a stable, eventually, well, I don't know if stable, but at least durable, clearly, but not peaceful order. Because we've seen lots of wars going on under unipolarity, more so than during the Cold War. So, I mean, to the point that maybe it's not even a stable order. It's durable, but it's not peaceful. And they all want to challenge that through this sort of latent power. And ultimately, they may well, and they are already increasing each one's military power, but in that sense, they're very far away from the dominance of U.S. military. And in that sense, we still have, and probably will have, continue to have unipolarity, unipolar world in that sense, because I define it polarity. I mean, polarity is a very, I'm finishing very quickly. Polarity is a Waltzian definition. And to my mind, it really is about military capabilities above everything. Obviously, you need economic capability because you need that to transform into military power. But essentially, polarity, which is what it is about military power, is not about economic power. Okay, that's why I said you could have unipolarity with a multipolar economic world as well. Thank you. Sorry about that. I'm sorry, I came back from ISA, from Potsdam, Berlin. I'm still sort of like, I presented 2 papers and was discussing. I'm exhausted, so I'm still recovering. I'm in sort of
still energy to answer more.
Sorry.
That's fine. Okay. No, that's it. Okay. Any other questions?
I would like to ask to Dr. Nergis, because you do anthropological study, that's what I understand, and uh, you do a lot of interviews also. So mine is, I just want to understand, I don't know whether I'll make sense or not, but I still want to ask you this is, when you do a lot of interviews, you must be also interviewing the native population in that country, right? Apart from the migrant or the refugees. So do you think that their mood of the native population also plays a role in terms of giving citizenship to these refugees?
First of all, I'm not an anthropologist. Sorry for disappointing you, but I'm a political theorist and international law scholar. We do interviews for other reasons. I'm trying to understand the legal framework. I'm trying to understand the litigation practices by human rights lawyers. And of course, you do talk with members of the community, but not in terms of establishing a sizable sample and being representative. But what I understood, especially from the bureaucracy, as well as many of the actively working legal advocates, is that the population at large is primarily entirely against giving citizenship to these populations unless they are endemic. By endemic, I mean if they have been in the region for a century or so, and then maybe that is a case, but anyone coming from outside. And then there are reasons for that. Now, Turkey is a different ball game. Turkey, I don't know where it's going. I don't know what calculations are being made. The dominant discourse in Turkey is that eventually all the Afghans, all the Syrians will become Turkish citizens, and Russians are already getting Turkish citizenship. So the population figures are changing wildly. But in Lebanon, there's a very, very sensitive balance between different sectarian groups. And Lebanon also has been under Syrian occupation for 15 years. The lay Syrian population is totally against Syrians settling in Lebanon for that reason alone, in addition to the pressure on the public services. There are certain schools and hospitals in Lebanon whereby the Syrian population is about tenfold larger than the Lebanese population receiving service, and the country does not have the infrastructure. They don't want this population. They want them to go back. And they say the land is immense in Syria. There's no reason for them to be settled in this tiny stronghold of Lebanese state. Jordan, similarly, they don't want to expand citizenship to Syrians primarily, because Jordan already has a Palestinian problem. The majority of the Jordanian population today is of Palestinian descent. And so there's a problem that if there's some sort of a change in the status quo and then there's a new Palestinian state, Jordan is already on its toes in terms of what's going to happen to the Kingdom of Jordan. They don't want to exacerbate the problem by adding a Syrian dimension to it in terms of the greater Syria dream. So by and large, from bureaucracy to the lay people on the street, there's acceptance of these populations. There's understanding that they're sisters and brothers. There's the Muslim charitable impulse as well. As long as they work, they join the society, but no citizenship. I mean, that's what I've been understanding from the ground.
Okay. I have a question too. If I look at it, and is that a question on the screen? It's just written it. Is that a question? You're writing. Okay. Okay, so I will have the last question to Marta Pereira, and if there is no more question, then that will be end of our panel. So Marta, yeah, my first question, do you remember after the presentation I asked why we just skip in your theory, in your theoretical perspective, why did you skip the bandwagoning and just move to the balance?
So the reason why I stayed with the balancing part of the theory is because when I applied the theoretical framework, I understood that the major alliances that were created were from a balancing perspective, as as they understood the countries on my study that in this case Israel wasn't a revisionist power, but a balancing, a status quo power. If I had to apply now the bandwagoning part of the theory of alliance, I would apply it to the Saudi-Iran rapprochement. As the Saudi, that is a status quo power, is starting to align with Iran, with Iran, which is a revisionist state on the perspective of my framework.
Okay, you think that now in the Middle East there are states they are revisionist, like Israel, Saudi Arabia, and Iran, that includes in this list. So there is no bandwagoning state in the region, in regional perspective.
In the regional perspective, I think that Iran is the revisionist power because the Middle East still thinks in an USA status quo part. If Iran became the hegemon, then there will be a change in the region. Right now, I think that Israel is considered a balancing state as it still has the US support, and it still has and it still counterparts Iran. That's a study that I want to do. It's to understand the relations between Israel and Iran. But right now, thinking about the Abraham Accords, I believe that they are a balancing perspective. As for the rich, another revisionist states maybe in the region would be maybe Qatar, as it is part of the Muslim Brotherhood. And
Yeah, I was insisting on that because bandwagoning mostly is a bipolar world system's inheritance, because there is a huge gap between the superpower and the rest of the states in the same polar. So they just follow the orders and the directions coming from the great power, the superpower. So that's the bandwagoning. So there is no bandwagoning in the world now, especially in the Middle East. No bandwagoning state is there now. So they try to revision all the aspects, and then at least they can have choose between two: China, Russia, the US, UA. So that's changed their foreign policy preferences from bandwagoning to acting alternatively or revisionist in the Middle East. So it was just my comment, not question. Okay. It was 2-hour journey and started with the good presenters and reached with your questions. Thank you very much. And this is the end of our first panel in the CESRAN 2024. Have a nice lunch, enjoy it, and for the next panel, we expect you to be here. Thank you very much.